A big hello from London. A really interesting series of weekly patterns last week. So starting with the stock indexes and stock index futures. We had a weekly key reversal up last week in the German DAX futures, which has seen a brilliant gapping move higher this week. We also had a weekly key reversal up last week in UK FTSE futures, which has seen a move up over last week's close, though not as dramatic as the move up in the DAX. Next, we had a weekly key reversal up in the French CAC40 futures last week, which also gapped higher this week, and which also has maintained that gap higher into this week. Importantly, the Dow Jones Index in the US also had a weekly key reversal up last week, but had a gapping move higher last Friday to make a new all-time high and high close. However, the market has not exploited that move up as prices have turned lower, filling in the gap below, though still staying close to Friday's close and the top end of last week's range. There was no such moves in the S&P futures nor in the Nasdaq indexes, but there was a weekly key reversal up last week in the PHLX semiconductor index, which saw a gapping move higher this week, mainly due to the market being closed on Monday, but making new all-time highs and high closes this week. Finally, for the TikTok generation out there, we had a weekly key reversal up in AMC stock of the US. So far this week, we have seen a small move higher than Friday's close, but not as yet escaping above last Friday's high. Now, with this move up in the FTSE futures in the UK, you would have likely expected an opposite move lower, perhaps in UK gilt futures. However, this has not happened. Rather, we have seen a complementary weekly key reversal up last week to UK FTSE futures in UK gilt futures last week, from a low that was last seen in the 1990s. This week we have seen an exploitation of that move upwards, making new recent highs and high closes. That covers it all for the financials. Over now to the currencies. And though they are not major ones, we did see a weekly key reversal down last week, if only just in euro sterling. However, there was a mixed message for this pair this week. We had a good follow-on lower on Monday this week, but yesterday prices turned back up significantly higher, forming a pipe bottom over Monday and Tuesday. And today we are higher still, seemingly rejecting the idea of a weekly key reversal down. We also had weekly key reversals down last week in sterling against the South African rand, in US dollar against the Colombian peso, and in US dollar against the Israeli shekel. All three have seen follow-on moves lower this week in varying degrees. Over now to commodities, and we had some interesting weekly patterns in energy, with a somewhat subdued weekly key reversal down in the Brent Gasoil spread last week, which has seen a strong follow-on move lower this week, down over 10%. Now, in the products, we also had weekly key reversals down last week in NYMEX heating oil futures, in NYMEX RBOB futures, and in ICE gas oil futures, all of which had strong follow-on moves lower this week. It is worth noting that neither Brent nor WTI crude oil futures had any such moves last week. It was all in the products. Finally, there was one other weekly key reversal in commodities last week, a weekly key reversal down in live cattle futures. This has seen neither a follow-on lower nor a reactionary move higher this week, with prices staying around Friday's close. As always, I'm happy to answer any direct questions with anyone who's interested. And with that, I'll finish this section from London, and I hope that you found these comments useful.
Thank you for watching and listening. This weekly broadcast gives the essential market patterns and consequences. Please be aware of the risk disclaimer posted both at the front and at the back of this broadcast. Copyright is Eddie Tofpick and ADM Investor Services International Limited. And here comes the final important bit.